Hello and welcome to this module on placing functions on par with objects in Scala. Starting from the absolute basics, we'll start with the simple or the seemingly simple operations of creating and invoking functions in Scala. This has a few subtleties that are worth discussing. Next, we'll move to talking about nested functions and higher order functions. These properties are collectively known as support for first class functions in Scala. Then we'll move on to a bunch of function level code reuse mechanisms, partial application of functions, currying, features like that, before moving on to new capabilities that are present in Scala and come quite in handy when it comes to writing framework type code, closures, and by name parameters. This module is really the heart of this course. It's packed with interesting and new concepts, so let's plunge in. I won't belabor this since we've discussed it already, but do keep in mind that functions are objects that contain behavior. Now that we are discussing functions in detail, we should also be aware that functions are objects but methods are not. Let's start with the mechanics. Let's learn how functions and methods differ in their definition. On screen now is the definition of a method. You can see that this is done using the def keyword. In effect, we are declaring getArea2 to be a method of whatever class contains this particular method definition. Now on screen is the definition of a function, and notice that it's subtly different. It starts with the val keyword. Effectively, we have assigned an expression block to a val named getArea. GetArea is an object, actually a function object. Let's cycle through a list of the differences between functions and methods. Functions, as we just saw, are value types. They can be stored in val and var storage units. Methods, on the other hand, are not value types. That means that they cannot serve as R values. They cannot be on the right hand side of an equal to sign, for instance. They are defined using the def keyword. Functions are first class entities in Scala on par with classes, and that's really because functions are objects. Every function object implements the trait function 0, 1, and so on based on how many input parameters that function object has. This is a set of traits that descends from the AnyRef type, by the way. Methods, on the other hand, are not objects. However, they can be pretty easily converted to function objects. We'll see how in just a little bit. This also implies that functions are ever so slightly slower and have a higher storage overhead because of the extra indirection involved with a function object as compared to a method. Functions are first class entities on par with classes. Methods, on the other hand, are not first class entities unless they are converted to function objects. In just a little bit, we are going to learn about type parameters and parameter default values. These can only be specified on methods and not on functions. Fundamentally, remember that methods are always associated with some class, but functions are not. This might surprise you a little bit, particularly if you're using Scala only in the interactive shell in the REPL environment, because there it might seem to you like you can define methods even outside a class. But that's actually only on the REPL. If you're using Scala in compiled mode from an IDE such as IntelliJ, for instance, you'll find that methods have to exist inside classes. Let's plunge into a small demo that will hopefully make it real. In this demo, we are going to try and get across 3 points. The first is that functions are really just parameterized expression blocks. The second is that functions are fundamentally objects. We will also examine how functions and methods are subtly different, even though the mechanics of defining and invoking them seem so similar. Okay, let's plunge in. Let's open up our Scala interactive shell and then type out a function. And what you can see on screen now is our function object in a value called getArea. GetArea is a function object, and there are the details of its type. Scala is informing us that getArea has type double in, double out. Notice that it takes in the radius, which is a double, and it outputs the area, which is another double. And there we also see that Scala is telling us that it is an object of type function1. Remember that function 1, 2, and so on are a family of traits. A trait can be loosely thought of as an interface with default methods. That's the Java equivalent of a trait. The function traits, function 0, 1, and so on up to function 23, indicate the number of input parameters. Here, our area has only one input, that's the radius, and that's why the type of this function object is function 1. Now on screen is our first method. Once again, because we are doing this from inside the Scala REPL, that's the interactive shell, we are able to create a method even though we are not inside a class. Had we been doing this in compiled mode, this method would have had to exist inside a class. This method, just like the function, takes a double in and returns a double. In fact, the expression block that constitutes the body of the method is exactly the same as that of the function. But the type is very different. The type is a giveaway. Notice how the type of method getArea2 does not include any reference to the function trait. There's no function 0, 1, and so on, as there was in the case of the function object. And the rest of the syntax is subtly different also. Notice the use of the val keyword with the function object and the def keyword for the method. The expression block is prefaced by an arrow with the function object, but with an equal to sign in the case of the method. And the return type is located a little differently as well. In the case of the function object, it's after the expression block. In the case of the method, it comes before the expression block. By the way, because of Scala's type inference, we could get away with not specifying that return type, and Scala would still understand it's meant to be a double. Now that that's done, all that remains is for us to invoke the function or the method. You can see here that the invocations of the function and the method are basically identical. And that again is because we are doing this in the Scala REPL. We do not have our method associated with a class. If we had done this inside a class, we would have had to specify the class or the instance variable while invoking the method. We would not have to do so with the function.